Mary phoned to inform me that my son had drowned while he was taking a bath. I immediately headed to the hospital, but by the time I arrived, he had already ceased breathing. Mary was on the floor, desperately hitting her head in sorrow, while my husband cried, holding me tightly and expressing that he couldn't bear to move forward from this tragedy. 6 months later, he returned home with a pregnant woman, impatiently stating that it had been too long and that we needed to move on. I awoke from a dream where the day of my son's accident unfolded. In the dream, I saw Mary pushing my son into the bathtub. Then, I woke up again to the sound of my coworkers talking about a team-building event scheduled for Sunday, a day that was supposed to be our day off. Frustrated, I quit my job right after Jimmy's incident, but now it seemed like I never actually left. To my shock, it was October 21st, 2023. At 11 a.m., I had somehow traveled back in time to half an hour before Jimmy's accident. The office environment didn't match my memories. My colleague, dressed smartly with her hair in a bun, didn't seem to be in her 50s. She was lamenting missing a blind date because of the team-building event. Confused, I grabbed her and asked, "What year is it now?" She looked at me strangely and pointed to the wall, saying, "Are you feeling all right, Amy? It's all written there." When I glanced up, it indeed showed October 21st, 2023 at 11 a.m. Realizing I had the opportunity to prevent Jimmy's accident, I couldn't wait for approval. I grabbed my bag and hurried home. On my way, I heard Jimmy's faint sounds and tears welled up in my eyes. It had been so long since I heard his voice after his passing. I used to watch videos of him repeatedly, but my ex-husband had deleted them, believing they brought bad luck. As I approached home, I saw Mary holding Jimmy's head underwater. I screamed and pulled him out just in time, and he coughed, regaining consciousness. He was confused, unaware of what had happened, but seeing him brought me to tears uncontrollably. After ensuring Jimmy was safe, I let him lie down. Mary, feeling remorseful, explained that she was trying to help Jimmy with his heart condition by training him to hold his breath. Although her actions were unintentional, I couldn't contain my anger and slapped her hard. Mary was knocked back by the blow. She covered her face and stood still for a moment before regaining her composure. "Unbelievable, you jerk! How dare you hit me? I'll make sure you regret this," she shouted. She tried to grab my hair, but I dodged her. I turned around, slapped her twice more, then kicked her to the ground, pressing her down forcefully. With a significant advantage in strength, I had her pinned and she couldn't move. She wailed on the floor, screaming, "Are you trying to die? Just wait until Peter comes back and see how he handles you. You're the one who wants to die." I sneered back, "You're the one wanting to die," as I punched her repeatedly. "You hurt my son, so I'll hurt you. An eye for an eye, right?" She cursed loudly, pounding the ground and crying out, "What proof do you have that I wanted to harm Jimmy? He's my grandson. Who would believe such a thing?" Her words hit me like a cold splash of water. There were no surveillance cameras at home, and she hadn't caused any substantial harm to Jimmy. Even if I reported her, the police couldn't do anything. Instinctively, I released her. She immediately stood up, holding her head and screaming, "Jerk, just wait! How dare you lay a hand on me? I'll have my son divorce you!" Suddenly, I calmed down. My father had bought me a house before I got married, and after marriage, David convinced me to sell it and buy a new one. The money from the sale was used by David for his business and became joint property. A divorce would have been easy for them. Thinking about Susan returning pregnant with David, I realized they must have gotten together by then. If I divorced, I would lose a substantial amount of money while their family would benefit, enjoy grandchildren, and live comfortably. Staying was the only way to ensure they received their deserved retribution. With this in mind, I kicked Mary's knee hard. She had chronic knee pain, and as soon as I kicked her, she screamed like a pig being slaughtered. The daughter-in-law is going crazy. Peter came back this evening with a dark expression. Who knows how much Mary had exaggerated things to him? He sat on the couch, slamming the table in anger. "Amy, why did you hit my mother? Don't you know she's not well?" In the past, Mary always acted caring in front of Peter, so our relationship appeared peaceful. We never argued, and Peter never spoke harshly to me. If he had, I would have left immediately. But now, I knew that to handle manipulative Mary, I had to be more manipulative than her. My eyes welled up with tears as Peter apologized. "I'm sorry, honey. You know, Jimmy has a heart condition. When I came back and saw Mom pressing him underwater, I was so frightened and acted impulsively by hitting her. After marriage, I always called him by his given name. But over the years, we became like siblings. Fearful, I held his hands tightly, my pitiful look leaving him speechless. After a moment, he turned away uncomfortably. Mom must have been just playing with Jimmy. She wouldn't harm her grandson, right? I lowered my voice. Yes, I was too impulsive this time. I know how much Mom has done for this family. Now that I've calmed down, I realize how wrong I was. I cautiously approached Mary, choking up, and asked, Mom, can you forgive me? She dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Oh, come on, it's no big deal. Mom knows you did it for Jimmy and for this family. How can I blame you? We appeared to be a caring mother and daughter-in-law. Peter nodded approvingly, saying a few words about his hard work outside, hoping I could be a good wife, then returned to his room. As soon as he left, Mary followed, and I silently trailed behind them, locking the door. Once they were in the room, I had to get closer to hear their conversation. Peter clicked his tongue in disapproval. Mom, seriously, why didn't you stop as soon as you heard her coming back? If she caught us, it would have been a disaster. Mary, sounding quite irritated, continued, It's only because you can't control your wife. She went on, When she was pregnant with Jimmy and underwent the 4D scan, it clearly showed he had a heart problem. She insisted on giving birth, and the surgery cost a fortune. If you ask me, you should have just drugged her earlier to have a miscarriage. I interrupted. Enough. I didn't know the disease could still be cured. Peter impatiently replied, You better hurry up and solve this. Make sure to do it when Amy is away on a business trip next time. I know you better. Hurry up and make Susan pregnant soon. I've given up on Amy. Who knows what health problems her next pregnancy will bring? Mary reminded him, I know you don't have to keep saying it. Their words felt like needles piercing my heart. Why should I end up holding a photo of Jimmy and feeling miserable while their family could be happy together? Jimmy, my Jimmy. Now that Mom had returned in this life, she would definitely take care of him. Initially, I had planned to send Jimmy back to my parents in my previous life. I noticed that Mary didn't like Jimmy, so as soon as my maternity leave ended, I sent him to my parents' house. But the next day, Mary appeared in front of many people in the neighborhood, dragging my mom with tears streaming down her face. I came here specifically to bring my grandson, she said, but Amy took Jimmy back without a word. If this got out, everyone would think I mistreated Amy. How would I face others? My mom always cared about her reputation, and with so many people watching, she couldn't bear it and quickly comforted Mary. Yes, Amy was wrong in this. I will talk to her later. That day, my mom sent Jimmy back. Peter happened to be on a business trip, and Mary disapprovingly told me, Forget about letting your mom keep the child there. There's no reason to send your grandson to your mom's house. Whenever you take him back, I will come to pick him up. I truly thought Mary was being considerate and wanted to care for her grandson. But looking back, she probably wanted to find a quick way to kill Jimmy to make room for a healthy grandchild. Even if I insisted on sending Jimmy back home, Peter and Mary would resent it, and my mom would also refuse. I secretly realized that Mary always took advantage of others, especially during events like free egg donations with blood pressure checks. No matter how far it was, she made sure to arrive early. Thinking about this, I joined several community groups to find out about free activities nearby. Among many advertisements, an event at a supermarket caught my eye. Free haircuts and a shopping bag as a gift. The supermarket was in a unique location. If you took a bus, it would take half an hour. But if you went through the community's back door, climbed over a wall, and walked for 5 minutes, you could arrive quicker. However, since the community was newly developed and road construction was ongoing, the back door was sealed and the wall had moss growing from disuse. Despite this, Mary would likely choose to climb over the wall to save $2 on the bus fare. The event was scheduled for the next day, and it happened to be raining, which was fortunate for me. In the afternoon, while walking with Jimmy, I visited the supermarket and took a promotional poster. When I returned, I folded it and placed it on the outside door handle. Usually, after Mary wakes up from her nap, she goes downstairs to collect cardboard boxes from the trash. I heard her coming out of the room and opening the door, then silence ensued. I couldn't help but smile. She must be looking at the event poster. During dinner, Mary mentioned she would be going out the next day. Peter, clearly unhappy, asked, "It's going to rain tomorrow. Where do you plan to go?" "Why not stay home and spend time with your grandson? It's the weekend tomorrow," Peter suggested. "Amy is at home. I don't need to stay," Mary replied, giving Peter a meaningful look. "As long as I'm home, she won't be able to act, so I might as well go out." "Fine, just don't go too far and be safe," Peter relented. Early the next morning, as dawn broke, Mary left home with an umbrella, heading towards the community's back gate. I watched her, thinking that if someone was at the back gate, or if someone was heading to the same supermarket, Mary could safely get there with assistance, and my plan would fail. I silently prayed and watched Jimmy become restless in bed, constantly calling out. I paced back and forth with him, feeling anxious. Another hour passed, and the rain outside was subsiding, but there was still no news from Mary. My heart sank as another plan failed, forcing me to devise a new one. Jimmy grew impatient in bed, and the house remained quiet except for the ticking clock. Just as I was about to lose hope, my phone rang abruptly. The ringtone was loud in the silent house, and I eagerly answered it, only to hear Mary's panicked voice on the other end. "Amy, come save me!" I bit my lip, fearing I might laugh, and anxiously asked, "What happened? Where are you now?" She cursed angrily on the phone, explaining that while climbing over the wall on her way back, she stepped on moss and fell off. She warned me not to call an ambulance or waste her son's money, saying she would go to the hospital alone. I promised and quickly hung up. I swiftly took Jimmy to my mother's house and then hurried to Mary's location. Mary was sitting at the corner of the wall, soaked and disheveled. She groaned in pain, cursing the property management for not fixing the wall sooner. I internally scoffed at her constant blame shifting. Despite signs posted against climbing, she still did it, and then blamed others when an accident occurred. Ignoring my thoughts, I rushed over, picked her up, and shouted, "Mom, how did you fall like this? Get up quickly. Let me take you to the hospital." Mary, in pain, huddled in the corner. "Amy, my leg is probably broken. I can't get up. Don't move my arms. It hurts. Don't dislocate them again." At the hospital in the afternoon, the doctor frowned upon reviewing the report and said the fall was severe, requiring hospitalization. Once settled, Mary reverted to her unreasonable self, sitting on the hospital bed, pointing at my nose and blaming me. "What's wrong with your brain? I told you I fell, and you didn't bring the car. Instead, you made me walk to the bus stop and take the bus. Are you a fool? Even a pig isn't as stupid as you. If it weren't for you, maybe I wouldn't need to be in the hospital." I stood aside, feeling guilty. "I'm sorry, Mom. I called a taxi, but it was raining today, and I couldn't get one quickly. If you can't find a taxi, find another solution." She clenched her teeth in anger, and I hobbled for half an hour, nearly crawling and almost breaking my bones. The elderly lady in the next bed couldn't bear it and spoke up. "Your daughter-in-law has been working hard for you. What else do you have to say? I bet your own daughter wouldn't do as much. What does it have to do with you?" Mary was about to retort when Peter rushed in anxiously. "Mom, how did you fall? How are you feeling now?" "I broke my bone and need to be hospitalized," I said, feeling guilty as tears welled up in my eyes. "It's all my fault. I should have borrowed a car from the neighbors when I knew it was this serious." "Borrow a car from the neighbors? Isn't that embarrassing?" Mary slapped her thighs and scolded, "You're so stupid. Can't you think of taking your dad's car before we got married? My dad bought me a car that Peter usually drove. When Peter's brother Jack reached marriageable age, Mary would occasionally mention borrowing our car for Jack to drive. She's calculating. She's all injured and still thinking about our car. Mom, Amy has been through a lot. Please say less." Peter reprimanded her and arranged for a caregiver to take care of Mary. As he was about to leave, Mary suddenly shouted loudly, "Where are you going, Mom? I have something important to do. It's really urgent." Peter looked at her perplexed, but Mary looked coldly at him as if she hadn't heard. "No matter what, you're not allowed to go. I don't care. During the day, you can use a caregiver, but at night, both of you must stay here." "Mom, I really have something important to do. I must go today," she insisted. "No matter how important, you're not allowed to go," Mary replied firmly. Mary stiffened her neck while the elderly woman in the next bed helped out. Their conflict was fully entrenched. If the neighbor's bed had anything, she immediately ordered me to arrange it. When the neighbor's children finished work, they all rushed over, and she insisted we stay as well. Peter's face turned dark in an instant. Unfortunately, Auntie next door was staring as if she were watching a show, so Peter couldn't say much and just walked out of the ward with his phone. I followed him and heard him hiding in the hospital corner, making a phone call. "I have something to deal with now. How about I come and accompany you tomorrow on the other side?" A person seemed very agitated, and their sharp voice was clearly heard through the wall. "Who delays a birthday by a day? Do you think I'm already dead or what? Peter, how could you promise me back then? Now, when things come up, you can't get away. Is it your nagging wife bothering you again?" In my past life, I was familiar with Susan because she was pretty and pregnant. She often bossed Peter and Mary around. At first, Peter found her spirited and even praised her, but after marriage, he grew tired of her and called her names behind her back. When Amy found out she was pregnant with a son, Mary advised Peter to endure it. At this moment, Peter furrowed his brow as the voice was piercing, so he moved the phone away a bit. After the other person finished venting, he whispered gently, "Seriously, I have something urgent. My mom fell and won't let me leave. If you don't believe me, I can show you the medical record." The person on the phone kept scolding him, making him feel embarrassed. "How about this? I'll go talk to my mom again and see if I can spare an hour to come and see you today." After he hung up, he casually walked out and said, "If your needs come up, you go ahead. I'll take care of Mom here. It's fine." He was taken aback, as if he didn't expect me to let him go. A flicker of gratitude flashed across his face. Then he briskly went to ask Mary for leave. However, Mary was not accommodating. She stood with her hands on her hips and scolded loudly. "That old lady next door is waiting to see me. Embarrassed. You're not allowed to leave, not even half a step today." When Peter was caught between a rock and a hard place, he eventually went to the door and called Susan again through the glass. I saw him patiently coaxing her in a low, submissive voice, before finally hanging up and transferring 10,000 yuan to Susan. At that time, I wanted to buy a 1,000 yuan dressing table, but he said I was wasting money. Now he spent 10,000 yuan on the other woman without hesitation. It was truly ironic. After dealing with Susan, Peter finally remembered me in the corridor. He walked out of the ward and sat down beside me with a rare hint of gratitude on his face. "You've worked hard today. My mom isn't feeling well, which is why she spoke harshly. Don't take it to heart," he said, leaning his head on my shoulder. There was a hint of perfume lingering in his hair. I resisted the urge to push him away and gently held his hand, saying, "Why would I argue with an elderly person? We are a couple. It's what I should do." For nighttime caregiving, only one folding bed was available per room. Surprisingly, Peter left the bed and blanket for me, choosing to sleep in the corridor himself. Mary didn't stay in the hospital for long before insisting on leaving, but her legs weren't strong. After discharge, with no caregiver around, she limped, so she ordered me to take half a month off to look after her. Without hesitation, I agreed. Mary was thrilled that someone agreed so quickly to such a demanding and cost-saving task. Even Peter glanced at me twice, looking satisfied. "Amy, they say a wise wife brings less trouble. I found the right person," he remarked, feeling reassured. On the first day of caring for Mary, she said she was hungry. I hurried into the kitchen to prepare a bowl of chicken noodle soup and served it within 10 minutes. As she sipped the soup, she made a sarcastic comment. "So you were hiding your cooking skills? I should have made you cook earlier. I've been taking care of you for so long for nothing." However, as she spoke, her expression changed to disbelief. She picked out a clump of chicken feathers from the soup and exclaimed, "Are you blind? Can't you clean the chicken feathers? Are you trying to disgust me on purpose?" She knocked over the soup, pointing at me and scolding, "Are you brain dead? You didn't even clean the chicken feathers. Are you intentionally trying to gross me out?" I trembled in fear. I didn't know. I've never cooked before," I stammered. She waved her hand dismissively and ordered me to continue. "From now on, make sure to bring all the necessary ingredients into the kitchen when you prepare our next meal. I'll guide you through the cooking process during dinner." She instructed me to slice the ribs with a sharp motion, but the knife slipped onto the ribs without causing any injury. Feeling nervous, Amy put in some effort. "All right," I declared, thrusting the knife forcefully onto the ribs. They remained intact, causing the knife to ricochet. It shot up to the ceiling and then came down near the bed, just inches from Mary's leg. Startled, Mary leapt from the bed, panicking and shouting, "Oh my God, you're making a mess! You scared me to death!" After her outburst, she called her son again, crying, "Peter, come back quickly! Your wife isn't cooking for me, and there's chaos in this house." When Peter arrived, he was visibly irritated. He slammed the door and confronted Mary, muttering, "Amy has never cooked before. The fact that she agreed to help is already generous enough. Why do you insist she cooks ribs and chicken too? Mom, are you doing this on purpose?" he questioned. His mother, exasperated, replied, "I'm giving her a chance to learn. Otherwise, we'll be ordering takeout every day from now on. Who can handle that? But did she learn? We still had to order tonight. You're delaying my work, and Susan will be upset with me because of it." Peter retorted, "Mary, you're stressing over your mother's diet while worrying about Susan. The doctor said she needs nutritious soup. If this isn't fixed, don't bother visiting Susan. Just come home after work to take care of me." Well, growing angrier, Peter accused her of creating problems and stormed out. As he left, our eyes met awkwardly at the doorway. He glanced at me and said, "You don't have to cook anymore. Just order takeout." Lowering my head and wiping away tears, I apologized. "I'm sorry, it's my fault for not knowing how to cook. Mom can't even have a warm meal." Sighing, she comforted me with a pat on the hand, saying, "It's okay. Taking care of Mom is already challenging. I'll handle the food situation after some brainstorming tonight." Ultimately, he decided to call Cindy for help. Cindy, who wasn't working and was home with her child, gladly agreed to cook for Mary, earning $2,000 a month. Mary was pleased with this solution, saying, "Amy can't cook, but at least my grandson will be looked after. Jimmy has plenty of toys, so we can move them to his place." The next afternoon, Cindy arrived with her energetic 4-year-old son, David. In the past, David had either broken Jimmy's toys or hidden bugs in Mary's clothes, making her uneasy. However, as he entered with a smile, he greeted me warmly. I quickly took him aside, gave him a chicken leg, and promised him a weekly allowance of $50 if he behaved well. His eyes sparkled at the offer, and he eagerly asked how to demonstrate good behavior. I gently guided him, saying, "You haven't seen your grandma in a while, so when you visit, give her a big hug." With that, he dashed off and burst into Grandma's room. Grandma was overjoyed to see him, and David, full of energy, jumped into her arms. Unfortunately, he was a bit too rough, and Grandma let out a squeal, exclaiming, "You little troublemaker, you broke my leg." Despite being only 4, David weighed over 50 pounds. Initially, Grandma had only fractured one leg, but David's weight caused another break. When Peter rushed Grandma to the hospital, his frustration was evident as he held her arm. Grandma complained, "A good daughter-in-law brings prosperity to the family. All these issues happen because your wife can't cook." Peter, feeling impatient, interrupted, "Whether it's one leg or two, she still needs to rest. It won't make much difference if she rests a few more months. With both your daughter and daughter-in-law here, I have to go." Angrily, Grandma declared, "If you leave this room today, I won't recognize you as my son." Nearby onlookers watched as Peter annoyedly responded, "I was just having dinner with someone and need to get back." "Oh, so you were dining with your mistress?" Grandma snapped. Caught off guard, Peter felt guilty and said, "I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I misunderstood you, thinking you were just a spoiled rich girl who only cared about indulgence." Sympathy in her eyes, I dismissed it. "No worries. When Mom needs me, I can't refuse." In the middle of the night, Mary groaned, needing to use the bathroom. I tried to ignore her, but she became increasingly agitated, punching the waist and cursing loudly. "Are you a pig? I need to go and can't hold it in." She hit me again, saying, "You damn pig, I need to go to the bathroom." Startled, I jumped out of bed half asleep, ready to help. But before I could reach her, everything happened in an instant. She collapsed, slapping the bed in distress. Heavens! I'm old, and I just had a massive accident. Seeing the bed covered in stool horrified me, and I rushed to assist her to the bathroom. However, I slipped on the soiled bedpan, and we both fell into the mess. Gripping her tightly, I landed on top of her, both of us covered in the mess. She screamed in agony. "Someone's killed me, Peter! Help!" Peter woke up, looking both angry and confused. He stared at the mess in disbelief before asking, "Mom, did you have an accident?" Confronted by her own son, her face turned red as she glanced around, then suddenly accused me. "It must be her. She drugged me. I knew it was impossible when she agreed to watch me at night." She's just trying to humiliate me." Peter, trusting me, turned to ask, "Is Mom telling the truth? Did you really drug her?" Smiling reassuringly, I responded, "What are you thinking? Your sister cooked, your nephew served, and you poured water for Mom. I never touched anything. Even if I wanted to poison her, I never had the chance." He thought for a moment and then asked Cindy, "Did you thoroughly wash the vegetables?" Cindy shook her head vigorously. "It's not about the vegetables. My stomach hasn't been feeling well. If there was an issue with the food, I would be the first to feel uncomfortable." She made a valid point. In her previous life, every time Cindy ate food her mother-in-law prepared, she ended up in the hospital. Initially, her husband thought she was intentionally defying her mother-in-law, leading to major fights. However, they later discovered it was due to improperly washed vegetables. Since then, Cindy took over cooking at home. It wasn't her or me causing the issue. However, her mother-in-law continued to have incontinence episodes that didn't seem like diarrhea. Suspicious, she turned her accusing gaze toward David. David was always mischievous, often bringing bugs to spice up the food. Once, we found a large green caterpillar in the food, which scared us, and gave me a fever that night. Without Peter saying a word, David suddenly confessed, "It's me. I put something good in Grandma's bowl." He took out a bag of white powder from his pocket and handed it to Peter, saying Grandma had told him it was beneficial and asked him to add it to his aunt's bowl. Thinking it was harmless, he must have intended to help his sick grandma first. Seeing what David was holding, Grandma suddenly screamed. She wanted to rush over, but her legs were weak, causing her to stumble into the yellow liquid on the floor. Now covered in it, she completely forgot her dignity. She sat on the floor, slapping her thighs and shouting excitedly, "You naughty boy! You're slandering me! Tell the truth! Did your mother tell you to drug your aunt? You naughty boy! You do bad things and dare to blame your grandma." Hearing this, Cindy immediately dragged David behind her to avoid suspicion and said unhappily, "Mom, stop talking nonsense. Why would I drug my sister-in-law for no reason? You're using the kid as a tool. David was led astray by you." The mother-in-law's face turned red and white alternately as she desperately gestured for Cindy to admit it. But David suddenly exclaimed, "Grandma, why do you keep blinking? Are your eyes broken?" Even Peter, though foolish, understood what was happening. His face darkened as he scolded angrily, "Mom, you're going too far. Amy has been taking care of you these days. How could you still think about drugging her?" Grandma's face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, I stepped forward and pulled Peter's sleeve. "It's okay, dear. Don't blame your mom for this. Maybe I didn't do something right and made her angry. It's my fault for not knowing how to cook. Amy, this isn't your fault." Peter, looking distraught, cleaned up his mother and let everyone return to their rooms. Instead of going back, he sat alone on the balcony, smoking one cigarette after another, looking somewhat desolate. When I approached him, he moved aside to make room. After finishing another cigarette, he looked at me thoughtfully and asked, "Do you think maybe my mom secretly drugged you when I wasn't around?" Being his mother, of course, I had to deny it. Blinking innocently, I said, "Oh, how could that be? Mom isn't that kind of person." But he seemed lost in thought and muttered, "Could it be that Mom drugged you before? Maybe that's why Jimmy has congenital heart disease." I knew Jimmy's illness had nothing to do with his mother-in-law, but thinking about Jimmy, I fell silent. I had been busy taking care of my mother-in-law lately and didn't know how Jimmy was coping with my parents. Coming back to my senses, I felt a warm breath on my neck. He buried his head in mine and murmured, "Darling, why don't we have another child?" Laughing, I replied, "I'm busy taking care of your entire family, and you're thinking of having a baby with me?" I shook my head. "Mom's not in good health. I want to take care of her first. Let's talk about kids later." Hearing this, Peter looked somewhat guilty and sighed. "I neglected it before. I never thought my mom would treat you like this. So, what do you want? I'll buy it for you." Looking into his eyes affectionately, I said, "I just want us to have a meal together." He looked surprised. "Just that?" I nodded. "Yes." Hugging him and acting sweetly, I added, "We haven't had a meal together in so long. I just want a simple dinner with you. Can we?" This made him feel even more guilty. The next day, he reserved a table at a restaurant costing an average of $5,000 per person for our dinner. I dressed up in a dress I hadn't worn in years and tied my hair back. He seemed nervous, and when our eyes met, I saw amazement in his gaze, similar to how he fell in love with me at first sight when we met at work. He had pursued me relentlessly, but after marriage, he gradually changed his style from tight, cinched clothes to comfortable, loose t-shirts and became indifferent. At that moment, he was amazed, but I just wanted to puke. Watching his expression during dinner, he handed me a box. "I bought this on my last business trip. If you like it," he said. I opened it to find a sparkling necklace with a 5-figure price tag. In the past, I wouldn't have dared to think about such an expensive gift, and he might have forgotten to give it to Susan. It had been a month since his last business trip. I gladly asked him to help me put it on. I love it. It's something I've always wanted but couldn't afford. I kissed his cheek lightly. "Thank you, dear. You're so sweet." A hint of guilt flashed across his face. During dinner, his phone kept ringing nonstop. Despite pressing the reject button multiple times, the caller wouldn't give up and kept trying again. After letting it ring over a dozen times, he finally answered in annoyance. "Can't you understand? I'm really busy right now." I couldn't hear what the caller said, but he glanced at me sneakily, then covered his mouth and said softly into the phone, Okay, I'll come see you tomorrow." "Fine." After hanging up, he explained nonchalantly, "The client is sick and insists I discuss business in person. Otherwise, they won't place an order." I leaned on his shoulder and suggested, "You can handle the business meeting. Leave the house to me." Maybe feeling guilty, or perhaps it had been a while since he saw me dressed up, I took a picture of us and asked him to post it on his social media. Surprisingly, he agreed. Peter arranged for a babysitter, and with Cindy looking after things, the house seemed calm again. But, of course, I couldn't let them relax too much. The next day, Peter woke up early, shaved, and put on a tie, probably preparing for the evening's date. He seemed in good spirits, humming a tune as he left briskly. Just as he left, Cindy also dressed nicely and departed. I knew where she was going. In her past life, Cindy had an affair with the older man downstairs. His wife had passed away, leaving him lonely with only money. Cindy's husband was not only stingy, but also had a violent temper. Under the pretense of visiting her mother, Cindy would sneak out to meet the older man secretly. Eventually, Cindy managed to secure over $1 million from him, divorced her husband, and was living her best life. Anticipating the right moment, I took out a spare phone and sent an anonymous text to Cindy's husband, then messaged the older man's 2 sons. After finishing, I casually turned off the phone and listened intently to the commotion downstairs. Within half an hour, Cindy's husband's angry shouts echoed from below. "Cindy, come out! I know you're in there!" Mary, hearing the uproar, stretched her neck curiously. "How come I hear my son-in-law's voice? Is Cindy there?" I rushed downstairs quickly to see what was happening. Cindy's husband was furious. He brought a few friends, and seeing that Cindy refused to open the door, they broke it down. When they entered, Cindy wasn't even fully dressed. Enraged, Cindy's husband didn't give her a chance to explain. He punched her in the face, pulled her by the hair, and started slapping her wildly. "You expletive! How dare you cheat on me behind my back? I'll kill you today!" Cindy, caught red-handed, sat on the ground covering her face and wailed, "Help! Murder! There's no justice! I am the justice today!" He continued to beat Cindy relentlessly, leaving her with bleeding front teeth. A crowd had gathered to watch. I quickly called Peter. "Peter, something's wrong! Come back quickly!" Cindy, hearing Peter's name, started shouting in distress. "Brother, your brother-in-law is going to kill me! Come back and save me!" Before she could finish, Cindy's husband grabbed her by the hair and dragged her outside, still swearing, "You shameless expletive! I'll kill you today!" The older man, who had never witnessed such an incident, was terrified and fainted on the spot. Peter, going crazy on the phone, yelled, "Amy, stop him first! I'll be there soon!" At that moment, the older man's family arrived. Seeing him on the floor, they thought Cindy had attacked him and immediately grabbed her, demanding an explanation. Believing these people were sent by her husband, Cindy fought back, grabbing one person and engaging in a brawl with 5 or 6 others. Peter arrived just in time amid the chaos, trying to pull Cindy's husband away, but he retaliated with a punch and then kicked Peter relentlessly. He gasped and cursed, "None of you are good people. I'll beat every one of you." Cindy's husband, trained in fighting, kept punching Peter in the stomach, leaving him unable to defend himself. Groaning in pain on the ground, both Peter and Cindy ended up in the hospital. Cindy was lucky, only losing some hair and 2 front teeth, but Peter was badly injured. Cindy's husband vented all his anger on him, causing Peter to suffer broken ribs, a broken nose, soft tissue injuries, a swollen face, and a crooked mouth from the beating. The older man's sons rushed Peter to the hospital just in time as he had a heart attack from the shock, but managed to survive. In the end, even though things didn't escalate too far, the 2 sons were furious, believing their father had been scammed. They demanded Cindy return the money or face legal charges. Fearing a lawsuit, Cindy had no choice but to return the money. Upon hearing about the incident, Mary fainted on the spot and had to be revived with a bucket of cold water by the maid. She wanted to go to the hospital but was bedridden and could only worry at home. Peter was in so much pain he could hardly speak. Despite all the chaos, he still remembered his appointment with Susan that day and immediately started making calls as soon as he left the hospital. "Sweetheart, I can't come to see you today." Yes, there's been a lot going on at home lately. We can't go to the zoo again, but how about waiting a bit? I'm pretty injured this time. We can see the monkeys another time." I couldn't hear what the other person said, but he furrowed his brow in impatience and said, "The house is a mess. Can't you understand my situation?" "I know that monkey looks like me," I replied. "You've said that so many times, but like I said, I can't go now. Why don't you go see it by yourself?" Susan was still yelling on the phone, extremely upset with Peter's repeated cancellations. After all, Peter used to drop everything to be with her whenever she called. His frustration grew, and Susan must have thought he didn't care about her or wasn't prioritizing her anymore. After 5 minutes of silence, whatever Susan said must have struck a nerve because Peter exploded in anger. "Damn it, you look like a monkey yourself!" He hung up the phone in rage. Honestly, even with his recent frustrations towards Susan, I had never heard Peter speak harshly to her before his passing. Behind the scenes of a happy, loving couple, someone is always managing all the messy things at home. I thought that with Peter constantly canceling plans, Susan would come looking for him at the hospital, but I was wrong. Maybe it was seeing the group photos on Peter's social media, or because Peter always had excuses lately and couldn't meet up. Susan couldn't hold back anymore and came looking for me. When I returned to get toiletries for Peter and Cindy, I was stopped downstairs by someone. It was Susan. She wore a hat, a tight shirt, and jeans that highlighted her figure, holding a stack of flyers. Even with a mask on, I could recognize her anywhere. She pretended not to know me, acting as a salesperson trying to sell me children's swim classes. I didn't know how long her sales pitch lasted, but she was so convincing it seemed genuine. Finally, she took out her phone and said, "Let's add each other on phone. You can think about it first or discuss it with your husband. When you've made up your mind, you can contact me." After talking for a while, she was merely trying to peek at my social media. Once she was far enough, I immediately posted, "He went to several stores during his business trip until he found the right one. My husband is so thoughtful." The picture was of the necklace Peter gave me that day. Before posting, I set the visibility so only Susan could see it. Knowing her temper, she would probably cause trouble for Peter again. Just as expected, when I returned to the hospital room, I heard Peter sounding a bit impatient on the phone. "Could you please stop causing problems? I'm seriously hurt. How could I reconcile with her? Do you even believe that? All right, I'll purchase it for you." He ended the call and transferred $20,000 to Czen. I'm not sure what magic Czen cast on Peter, but it seems she had already acquired tens of thousands. After hanging up, I entered the hospital room. The moment Peter saw me, he quickly concealed his phone beneath the pillow and awkwardly said, "Oh, it's a client. They heard I was unwell and insisted on visiting, but our 3-bedroom policy only allows 1 caregiver per bed. No one else can enter." Surprisingly, such a rule exists. No wonder Susan couldn't locate him in the hospital. I asked him in surprise, "Did you explain everything to her correctly?" He nodded, confirming that she wouldn't come anymore now that it was clarified. Satisfied, I quietly stood up, positioned myself in a hidden corner, took a covert photo of Peter and me, and shared it on my social media with the caption, "When you're at your lowest, you need your loved ones by your side. Even if they have to step away for a moment, they still miss you deeply." Only Susan could see it. Shortly after my post, Peter's phone rang again. He turned pale upon seeing the caller ID and awkwardly glanced at me. "It's a client call? Can you handle it?" I agreed and left the room tactfully. Through the glass, I could see Peter struggling. His face was in pain, and he could barely speak. "Will you ever stop? I really can't have another person come in here. Can you stay and keep me company?" I replied, "Are you out of your mind? What if she notices you? If I don't let you in, I can't prove my innocence." "Fine, I'll talk to her later outside." I almost laughed at how a third party still needed others to vouch for their innocence. As expected, when I returned, Peter cautiously suggested, "How about you leave at night? I can arrange for a nurse to stay with me." I hesitated because the hospital had already registered the names of nighttime caregivers, and changes weren't allowed. His voice rose with frustration, straining his injury. He then took a deep breath of cold air, saying, "It can't be changed." I touched his hand warmly. "Don't worry about me getting tired. Taking care of you is what I should do." He stood there staring blankly at me. Then a smile slowly appeared, almost tearful, recalling how he and Susan discussed that I couldn't replace him as his caregiver. I quickly updated my social media, suggesting hiring a night nurse, but my husband insisted he couldn't live without me and needed me by his side. Being a long-married couple, we weren't embarrassed about it. Soon after, Peter's phone rang again. From a distance, Susan's angry voice was audible. "Peter, you lied to me again, you bastard." The issue was resolved when Peter transferred 50,000 yuan to Suzanne. His wallet was always full, similar to Dorman's pocket. Whenever Suzanne needed money, he could access it. After our marriage, Peter used all the dowry money I provided to invest in various ventures. Although not as prosperous as big businesses, he should have saved a considerable amount. However, no matter his earnings, he never disclosed them. When I inquired, he would impatiently respond that it was his money and I had no right to ask, even offering to take out my dowry money to give to me. While contemplating this, Peter called me to help him order food. He was very particular and found hospital food unappetizing. He handed me his phone, swiped a few times, and said he wanted lunch from Jax's. Then he asked me to order something for us to take back. As I browsed the menu, a message popped up. "Hey, what have you been up to lately?" It was from Peter's brother, Jack. Jack had always been indulged by Mary, never finishing junior high, and often hanging out on the streets. Sometimes he couldn't even afford meals, and would ask Peter for money. Recently, he had started gambling, leading to frequent reprimands from Mary. Seeing his message caught my attention. While Peter rested, I quickly sent Jack a screenshot of a bank deposit and then immediately deleted it. Jack was thrilled. "Bro, you have this much money?" Relieved, I calmly replied, "Sent it to the wrong person. What's up?" He responded, "Bro Capone wants me to join a big project. If I invest 500,000, it'll double in less than 6 months. Peter looked confused. "You haven't decided yet? I'm starving, just go ahead." I texted Jack to call me, deleted the chat, and gave the phone back to Peter. As he took it, Jack called. These days, Peter had been secretly contacting Susan behind my back. Seeing Jack's call, Peter quickly relaxed and put the call on speakerphone. Jack's excited voice came through, "Bro, you're really rich now. I was going to ask for 20,000, then get mom and sister to contribute, but now you can handle it alone." Peter frowned and glanced at me, saying, "Don't talk nonsense. I don't have that kind of money." Jack persisted, "Capone said he wants you to invest in a project. If you lend me 50,000, I'll pay you back 70,000 in 6 months. Peter scolded him, "Forget it. Capone isn't reliable. You cut ties with him now." Jack urgently pleaded, "Wait, how about lending me 20,000? You're rich enough to give me 20,000. I'll handle the rest with mom and sis." Capone warned Jack that if he didn't come up with the money within 5 days, he'd find someone else. Peter listened more and more irritably before finally refusing, ending the call. Concerned, I asked what was wrong. Peter was still angry. "When will my brother grow up? Hanging out with shady people, always borrowing money? If he gets into trouble, he'll still owe others." Despite Jack's unreliability, Peter had always supported him, preventing him from causing major issues. I softly suggested, "Just lend him 20,000. It's not much. Even if it fails, he'll learn and cut ties with Capone, which might be beneficial in the long run." Peter looked at me for a moment, then sighed, "You're too naive. If he invests this 20,000, Capone will just find more ways to exploit him. It won't be solved with just a little money." Frustrated, he rubbed his temples and waved his hand. "Forget about him. Go get the food first." After leaving the hospital, I called Mary. Although she was bedridden at home, she acted busy daily, either asking me to report Peter's condition or requesting various items for him. As soon as the call connected, the elderly woman began shouting energetically, complaining that Peter had been difficult lately and that David was tormenting her, asking when I would return to take care of her. I informed her that Peter would be discharged over the weekend and subtly mentioned Jack asking Peter for money. Upon hearing this, Mary immediately started scolding again. Jack never gave her a moment's peace and had recently returned to gambling. Fortunately, his brother had some ambition, or else Jack would have caused even more trouble. "How much did he ask for this time?" I asked, smiling slightly, and whispered, "Borrow 50,000. Peter responded, "I only have 20,000. I asked Jack to find a way to get the rest from you." Mary reacted with disbelief. "Where am I supposed to get the money? Why does Jack need so much? I'm not lending it." I quickly added, "Jack needs it for an investment. He said he has insider information, and with 50,000, it will double in 6 months, allowing him to repay 70,000. I could sense Mary's interest. "So why wouldn't Peter lend it? Is he out of his mind?" she thought. "He said he doesn't have the money and asked Jack to seek help from you and Cindy." Mary became furious at the idea of being asked for money and pushed it onto me. "Wait, I'll talk to him after I buy the food." I heard Peter angrily shouting in the ward, "Don't lend! Don't lend! Jack's true colors. Can't you understand, Mom? How can you always side with Jack?" As Peter had his IV drip changed, his agitation caused the needle to drip blood, and in his hurry to make a call, he accidentally put the phone on speaker. Mary was yelling, "Lend your sister's money. Where can we get it? I don't have any either. You gave that girl money. Why not lend it to your brother for an investment?" Peter frowned deeply. "This is clearly gambling. If I give him the money, it's like throwing good money after bad. It's a lost cause. He used to gamble. This isn't an investment." Mary insisted. "Your brother rarely shows responsibility. I can give you an extra 20,000. Why can't you trust him this time?" Peter interrupted firmly. "I'm not lending this money. If you want to lend, you go ahead." Ignoring Mary's curses, he ended the call. Just then, Peter's phone rang again. He answered, and Susan's sweet voice came through. "Peter, do you still have money? Transfer some to me again. This time, I'll consider it a loan from me to you. My brother got a girl pregnant, and her parents are causing a scene at our house. My dad suggested giving them 20,000 as dowry and marrying the girl." Peter was already irritated and became furious. "Money, money, money, that's all you think about. If my brother can't afford a girl, do you think I'm a fool? I've been in the hospital for days without hearing a word of concern from you. All you talk about is money." He angrily added, "I don't want to discuss this now. We can talk when I'm discharged." After she hung up, pretending to be unaware, I quickly entered the room, but Peter looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. After a moment of silence, he reflected, "It's only when you're faced with situations that you realize who's truly reliable." Susan didn't receive any money that day, and the next day she would surely seize the chance to confront Peter upon his discharge. That night, I updated my social media again. On my husband's side, when trouble arises, I'm the most dependable one. The accompanying photo was a screenshot of a large transfer record I found online. As expected, the following day after Peter returned home, Susan called, "You must have been avoiding me these past few days. I don't care. You must give me 20,000 today. If my brother's girlfriend leaves because of the dowry issue, I can't guarantee what my brother will do to you." In a past life, I had met Susan's brother at their wedding. He was a burly man with tattoos covering his arms and a large gold chain, looking quite intimidating. However, Peter had never met Susan's brother before and thought he was just like Jack. Peter's face turned pale. Susan responded pleasantly, "I'm not threatening you. Remember what you said? You'd treat me well and be good to me and my family too. I've informed my family, but now you're not only avoiding meeting me, but also hiding that you have money. When my family needs it the most, if my brother doesn't come to you, who else will he turn to?" Realizing Susan wasn't joking, Peter cursed bitterly. "Your brother is a loser. Talking about finding a girlfriend and making his sister sell herself, he's really shameless. I'd rather marry your brother's girlfriend." Susan's brother suddenly grabbed the phone, furious. "Just you wait for me." I didn't expect Susan and her brother to show up so quickly. An aggressive, tall man with muscles bulging appeared, holding a wrench and a bottle of wine. Peter realized he was dealing with someone dangerous. Fear took over, and he began to limp around the room, trying to hide. Susan kept bombarding his phone with threats to come upstairs and break down the door. Fearing that I would discover the situation, Peter had no choice but to confront it directly. Susan's brother stormed in, grabbing Peter by the collar and shouting loudly, "Did you call me a loser?" Peter glanced at his brother's intimidating stance, becoming so scared that his legs gave out and he couldn't speak. Seeing Peter's weakness, his brother threw him to the ground, inspecting him disdainfully. "You act like a loser yourself, but dare to call others losers." He smashed a beer bottle against the wall and pointed it at Peter. "My sister is pregnant now, and it's your fault. How are we going to solve this?" Peter was stunned. "This can't be happening. I'm telling you, it's yours, so it's yours." His brother threatened him with the bottle. "Either you divorce and marry my sister, or you give me $20,000, and we forget this ever happened. Otherwise, I'm coming to your wife." Peter had considered divorcing Susan before, but her constant demands for money made him hesitant. Now, with Susan's brother looking fierce and menacing, Peter was paralyzed, unable to think. He looked at Susan, then timidly at her brother, and after a moment, weakly asked, "$20,000? Can this really settle it?" His brother agreed. "All right." Peter took out his phone to transfer the money to Saizen, but after a few failed attempts, he looked up in disbelief and hesitantly asked, "Can I go upstairs for a moment?" Seeking his brother's approval, he rushed upstairs, burst into his mother's room, and yelled, "Mom, did you take my money?" His mother, lying in bed, was startled and patted her chest in shock. "What are you talking about?" Peter responded furiously. "I transferred $50,000 to Jack this morning." His mother smiled happily. "Didn't Jack promise to give you an extra $20,000 within 6 months? You'll profit from this money." Realizing he couldn't reason with her, Peter took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. "Now call Jack and tell him I urgently need $20,000. I'll repay him in a few days." Reluctantly, his mother picked up the phone to call Jack, but struggled as Jack always kept his phone with him. She began to panic. "Oh no, Jack always has his phone on him. I hope nothing bad has happened." Peter, whose phone kept incessantly ringing with Susan's calls, found himself too preoccupied to consider Jack. In a rush, he implored his mother, "Mom, can you lend me $20,000? I'll pay you back once I resolve things with Jack in a few days." His mother, clearly annoyed, reached into her purse and responded, "Why do you need my money?" Frustrated, Peter gestured out the window and yelled angrily, "You expect me to have a son now that Susan is pregnant? They're all out there, and her brother is threatening to kill me if I don't give him $20,000. Mary followed his gaze and noticed a menacing tattooed man outside the window holding a half-empty bottle. Fear and panic set in as she patted her pockets. "Mom, this isn't enough for $20,000. How about this? Talk to Amy, ask her to make space for Susan, and you can bring Susan home." Peter objected. "But the baby isn't mine." Shocked, Mary exclaimed, "What? How could she be so shameless if it's not yours? Why are you scared?" Peter paced anxiously. "I've suspected something was wrong since last week. She kept asking me for money. Mom, you introduced me to Susan and secretly transferred money to Jack. Figure it out yourself. I'm done." Resigned, he left Mary speechless. She stared wide-eyed and said, "I won't give it. I don't have the money? Go ask Amy. She's wealthy and gullible. She'll definitely help you." Unable to stay in bed, Mary called me while shouting at Peter. Hearing their conversation from the next room, I pretended not to hear and went in to see what was happening. Peter opened his mouth, unsure of what to say, before Mary intervened. "Amy, Peter is in some trouble. Can you borrow him $20,000 from your dad in case of an emergency?" Peter quickly agreed. "Amy, I'm facing business issues. Can you lend me $20,000? "Oh no, $10,000 will be enough. I'll repay you once I sort things out with Jack." I looked at him sternly and said, "Peter, I want the truth." He seemed briefly flustered, then clenched his fists and stayed silent. Gently, I took his hand and said, "We're husband and wife. You can tell me anything, even if it's a crime. We'll face it together." Surprised, his eyes showed a hint of redness as he hesitantly responded, voice choked, "What if I betrayed you?" I smiled. "Men aren't always faithful, but as long as you're willing to return, I'll be here waiting." He lowered his head, wiped his eyes, and looked touched. I quietly watched him until he calmed, and then he confessed everything about Susan. He revealed that Susan was a girl from a neighboring village who chose him to establish herself in the city. He admitted he was tempted by Susan and wanted a healthy son, so he accepted the arrangement Mary set up. He insisted Susan wasn't carrying his child because he had taken precautions. Emotions swirled within me. I couldn't fathom why he would harm another child just to have a healthy son. Suppressing my feelings, I asked, "Now that I understand, why are you still giving her money?" He was momentarily stunned, then his eyes brightened as he realized, "Right, that solves the problem, doesn't it? But Susan's brother is intimidating. I don't know what he's capable of. What if he beats me up if I don't pay?" I squeezed his hand softly, comforting him. "If he hurts you, he'll end up in prison. Do you think he would do something foolish for his sister? We live in a lawful society. What can he do to you?" I smirked. "He's not coming for me, so I have nothing to fear." Peter was unaware that Susan's brother had been in prison 3 times and was recently released. He processed my words, took a deep breath, and said with relief, "You're right. Now that I know, I'm not afraid of him leaking this information. I don't want any contact with that woman anymore. She's too manipulative, always asking for money." He sighed. "With everything happening at home, I finally know who I can rely on." I looked at him and suggested, "Then I'll sue Susan to recover our joint marital property." He hesitated, so I added, "Mom transferred all your money to Jack. If Jack doesn't return it, we won't have enough for next month's inventory. Besides, Susan and her brother are using you. You can't just let this go." With a dark expression, he finally nodded solemnly, "All right." Susan and her brother waited for Peter for a long time. When he didn't show, they became angry, banging on the door and cursing. Mary was so frightened she hid in the room, trembling. Peter was also scared. "Thank God I told you everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left with just $20,000. Susan and her brother caused a scene at the door all afternoon but gained nothing, eventually leaving grumbling. Peter quickly prepared the lawsuit and took Susan to court. Susan was furious. On the trial day, she and Peter exchanged harsh insults. "You idiot! I saw through you a long time ago. You've been hiding because you just wanted to sleep with me and leave." Peter retaliated. "You want tens of thousands for every time we were together? Who do you think you are? You deserve to be exposed as a freeloader." Their heated argument didn't sway the court's decision, which ordered Susan to return all the money Peter had given her. However, Susan had already passed the funds to her brother. Confronting her about the money was like forcing her brother to return it all. Her brother couldn't handle it. And on that day, he found someone to break Peter's arm in front of the courthouse, even chopping off one of his fingers. Susan wasn't backing down. She turned all their chat records into a 30-page PowerPoint and posted it at the main entrance of the business mall where Peter worked, causing a scandal. The mall became a hot topic for 3 consecutive days. Passers-by pointed and cursed, criticizing Peter as a shameless man who only took without giving and then fled. The business's reputation suffered, affecting sales. They had no choice but to refund Peter's rent and ask him to leave. Peter was rushed to the hospital with bleeding from the courthouse incident. Mary received a call from Jack. The $50,000 he had invested had initially earned some money, but he was tempted to gamble the profits. He lost everything and ended up owing large sums to loan sharks. He cried on the phone, begging Mary for $1 million, threatening that he would be beaten to death by Capone's men if she didn't help. Terrified, Mary withdrew all her retirement savings and the money Susan had returned to Peter to pay off Jack's debt. When that wasn't enough, she considered asking Cindy for a loan, but Cindy, fearing Susan's retaliation, had already moved out with David overnight. Mary came to me for money, but I shook my head, saying I had none. By the time I reached the hospital, Peter had stabilized. He lay in bed, pale, staring at me as if fearing I might disappear. Then he smiled with relief. "I'm lucky to have you by my side, or I'd truly have nothing." Shaking my head, I said, "Seriously? You have nothing?" I then took out the divorce agreement from my bag and signed it. "Our son is mine. Let's part ways amicably." His smile froze, and he stared at me in disbelief. "What does this mean? Didn't you say you'd wait for me forever?" Seeing his naive expression, I responded coldly, "Peter, I used to think you treated me like a fool, but now I realize you're the biggest fool." I laughed. "I can't be with you anymore, especially since you and your mother plan to kill Jimmy." He was stunned. Regaining his composure, he slammed the table and confronted Amy. "Have you been playing me all along, knowing about Susan's existence?" Amy quickly admitted the truth. He angrily questioned her, insisting he had cut ties with Susan without harming Jimmy or his mother. Amy stared back, unable to see any fault in her actions. Whether it was plotting, cheating, or harming his son, any of these alone would have morally condemned him. He clenched his teeth and glared fiercely at the divorce agreement, then smirked, declaring he wouldn't sign it and that they could continue dragging the issue since he had nothing to lose. He warned Amy not to think she'd be better off, claiming he could ruin her as well. Amy nonchalantly told him to do as he pleased and threatened to sue him. They spent over 3 months in court, and eventually, the court granted the divorce, splitting all marital assets. This included the $500,000 Mary had given Jack, the money Susan had returned, and the funds Mary later gave Jack to pay off his debts. When the divorce became official, Peter had no money left. In front of a notary, he wrote an IOU to Amy. His eyes reddened as he looked at her, asking if there was still a chance for them. Amy remained silent. After about 5 minutes, he bit his lip, eyes downcast and bitter. "I've lost everything. My mother is ill, my sister ran away, my brother is irresponsible, and now I'm disabled and drowning in debt." Each day, Jack became more obsessed with gambling, racking up more debts. After the divorce, they settled the marital home and split the money between Peter and Amy. But Jack had stolen Peter's money to gamble it away. Wiping his face, Jack begged Amy to let him stay by Jimmy's side, even offering to work near Amy's home or take a delivery job just to see Jimmy. Sorrowfully, he knelt, covering his face and breaking down in tears, unable to express himself. Amy coldly pushed him away, questioning if he deserved it. She believed that a man who had tried to harm his own son had no right to show regret. As Amy took back the IOU, Peter became hysterical. "Amy, I'll climb out of this hole. You think I'm just lacking money, but I'll prove you wrong." Ignoring the sound of something falling behind her, Amy walked away without looking back. She quickly sold the house, moved her parents, and stared in disbelief at the divorce certificate in her hand. It had only been half a year, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. With Jimmy now able to walk, he toddled over holding a piece of bread, offering it to Amy. She accepted with a smile, ruffled his hair, and watched him become overjoyed as he pulled her to play. She then took out her phone, deleted all of Peter's social media accounts, and blocked his number. For her, rebirth meant redemption and a chance to change her fate. The darkness had lifted, and she was ready to embrace a brand new life, while Peter, burdened by his past debts, remained trapped in a grim quagmire.